The next speaker will join me on stage is Maria Guadalupe. Maria is a professor of economics at INSEAD. She holds a chair in organizational economics and productivity. Maria holds a PhD in economics from the London School of Economics. And before joining INSEAD in 2012, she was an associate professor in the Economics and Finance department at the Columbia Business School, where she held a chair in leadership and ethics. So now Maria is a member of the Economic Council of the French Prime Minister and of the French expert group on minimum wages. Her research explores different dimensions of organizational choices made by firms and the impact on their performance. Welcome, Maria. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to the organizers for an amazing day. I've had a blast from the first day when we the first talks in the morning. We were talking about brains and fruit flies, and now we're on to organizations and how these brains and cells interact in a kind of real environment. So I'm going to be talking about norms and norms in organizations and how they relate to inclusion and performance. And I want you to think about what are the dominant norms of organizations that we know. And I think many organizations are characterized by environments that create a lot of competition between individuals that require, to be dominant, to be strong, to be infallible, to show no emotions, to be, always at your best game. And where risk-taking is encouraged, that are these meritocratic, super meritocratic, where the fastest runner or the best worker will get ahead of all of the others. We think that these kind of environments where we set up also structures with incentives, with promotion structures that foster this competition and hyper-competition will lead to higher performance of organizations. And, I think this race here is not so different from tenure track cases where, we're running to get tenure, and there's this strong, very competitive up-or-out system with limited number of outlets where you can publish, with limited grants that you can get. And so this sense of hyper-competition where the survival of the fittest is at work, and where the best will survive, and that will lead to better performance of individuals and organizations. Now, that's a kind of a quite common paradigm. However, organizations are also struggling with creating more inclusive organizations that foster collaboration that's going to be at odds with hyper-competition, that try to retain talent, make talent thrive, make talent feel they belong. And those kind of two paradigms seem to be a little bit at odds. Now we think a lot about psychological safety. How do we create psychological safety in teams that express diversity so that we can have more opinions and find better ideas, etc. And while the traditional paradigm has been one where competition leads to higher performance, now firms are struggling with creating this kind of more inclusive environments. And if you think about it, the first paradigm is one that is characterized by more traditionally masculine, stereotypically masculine behaviors, where this one would be more characterized by what we call stereotypically feminine behaviors. And so we go on, and firms are thinking about how do we actually set up my workplace. So what I'm going to share with you is research from two ongoing papers. One is almost done, and the other one is more ongoing, where we've been asking ourselves this question. So when we think about the norms that are in place at work, we know that these hyper-dominant, like hyper-competitive norms, stereotypically masculine norms of behavior, research has shown they seem to be not great for well-being. They stress people, they make it more anxious, they make them feel they belong less, especially sometimes for women, more, not always. But do they increase performance? Are these norms the price to pay for more highly performing firms, therefore society? Are they the price to pay for more highly performing research institutions, therefore better science? And we don't know very much about this. So that's where the first paper, which is with Daisy, Pauline, and Kaiser Snellman, who are colleagues at INSEAD, where we're going to talk about. So that's the first research I'm going to show you is how can we shed some light on this question of whether do they increase performance. And then I'm going to turn on to another paper. Well, given we care about creating more inclusive environments, do we know how to increase something that's been talked about a lot, psychological safety in teams? And these I'll share some research with Silvia Castro and Florian Engelmeyer on a field experiment, a randomized field experiment in RCT we did with Novartis, so large pharmaceutical company, to try and foster psychological safety, and I'll share what we found with that. So let me jump in quickly. So I think businesses and many fields in academia, especially research has shown mostly male-dominated fields, are characterized by these hyper-dominant workplace norms. We're going to use this scale to measure these norms. It's called the Masculine Context Culture Scale, with Andre, who spoke this morning, has contributed a lot to and done some interesting research on. And the behaviors I want you to think about that this scale tries to capture are settings where individuals are expected to be, ruthlessly competitive and individualistic, to put work over family, we're working all the time, where displays of emotion and vulnerability would be frowned upon, and that you always have to be strong and at your best, right? So we try to characterize organizations using this scale. And we took this to the data, and this is going to be an academic setting. So we collected data from 5 leading European business schools. And business schools are an environment where we think this, related to business, these norms of strength and dominance and hyper-competition are really at work. We measured these masculinity context culture items. We collected a lot of information on the demographics, on the family structure, on whether they have children, whether they're married, so we know a lot about the individuals, and some well-being variables, as well as a subjective performance measure. And here, interestingly, we collected data for faculty and staff. So faculty will be like the picture that you just showed with majority men, and staff is going to be majority women. Then we are going to obtain for these 5 schools the output, the research output, publications, citations, and impact of everybody. And I'm going to try to see, do we have any evidence that when you're faced with more competitive norms, you actually perform better or worse? So one novel contribution of the article is that a lot of the research that had used these scales, and not just about these scales, but more generally, they would ask, what is your individual belief about these sets of behaviors? And on the right, I have the exact questions we adapted from the original scale, we took from the original scale. And that's what we would typically be asked. So when we go there, we go to these institutions and we ask, what's your belief for each individual, staff and faculty, all ranks, etc., about this scale? How do you actually feel? We find things that have been found in the literature before, which is that the higher the perception of this competitive environment, this high stereotypically masculine expectations environment, the higher the intention to leave, and the lower the well-being. And this is true controlling for a ton of things, right? We throw in gender, institution, field, department, rank, length in institution, whether you're married, whether you have children, all kinds of things that be correlated with these beliefs. Still, this is a correlation. We can't fully push the causal implication, but anyway, we get the same. Now, the issue, though, is that when I ask you about your individual beliefs, this is going to have 2 components, we think. One is really what is your individual belief because your personal history. And another one is like the part that is really about a norm. So if we want to think that norms and culture affect these different perceptions and outcomes, we really want to separate out in the survey how much comes from your individual idiosyncrasies, your history, etc., with what everybody in the group really thinks. So what we really want to capture is not just what you think, but what you think that you have in common with people in your reference group. So we're going to build a new measure, which is going to be, we call norm. It's not the individual answer, but the norm, which is how well your individual answer correlates with the answers of people in your reference groups. And we're going to take as reference groups your institution, but also, people in your academic field, your research, if you're in sociology or, operations or engineering is going to be different. And then people in your rank, it's likely that you develop norms around rank and your gender. So this allows us to do something which is, first, we have something that is really the norm, is how do you, what is the belief that's common to everybody in your reference group. And then it allows us to control for a lot of things in the regressions, in a nutshell. So conceptually, I'm going to separate out from this original measure the norm part, the belief that's correlated with the beliefs in my reference group, and we do this very simply. You regress your individual belief on the means in the different reference groups, so we're going to have a predicted value of the norm given the groups you belong to. And then whatever's the residual, it's the rest, is whatever is not explained by the belief that is common to the means in these reference groups. So that's how we're going to separate the two. So I'm going to ask the same question I asked before. When I regress turnover intentions and well-being on this, norm versus idiosyncrasy, do I get the same result? And the answer is yes, and it's even stronger for the norm. So here's the earlier result I showed you. If I separate it out into the norm versus the idiosyncratic, we see still the norm in my group actually affects positively my turnover intention and negatively my well-being. And that's the same for the idiosyncratic, but we're not surprised about that because they're all measured in the same survey. All right, so that's the first thing. Are they different for men and women? The answer is no. For both outcomes I showed you, the correlations are the same. These are conditional correlations, conditional on other things, still they correlate. Women and men are equally negatively affected by these norms. Now, the two question is, how does it affect performance? Some of this had already been shown in the literature. We have this novel measure, but really the question is, how does it affect objective metrics of performance? So I'm going to get publications of these individuals. I'm going to get, so it would be a measure of quantity of output, then citations, like a measure of quality of output. And for those on Google Scholar, we got the H index as well. And I need to say this is based on a sample of 650 academics around. So that's the total population of the next research. And this is what we find. So we find no evidence of a positive effect on performance. If anything, it's negative, sometimes more or less significant. These are the coefficients on the number of publications in a Poisson regression on the MCC. We see that it's negative. Those exposed to more negative norms, more masculine, stereotypically masculine norms, publish less. We could say, oh, maybe they publish less, but they really write these really impactful papers that have, actually that's not the case. It's still negative, it's less significant, and similarly for the H index. So this does suggest that, clearly no signs of that these environments actually make you publish more. And then we did the same thing. Does it differ for men and women? Because the thought is that, well, maybe it's bad, but maybe this is all driven by women. Is women really suffer in these high MCC environments, and therefore that's where we see this negative effect? And the answer is that's not true. If anything, we see that men actually suffer slightly more. It's not super strong, but the difference, but nobody benefits from this. If anything, men seem to suffer more from this environment. We think that's driven a lot by self-selection of which women stay, right? Because I have to say, all of this is conditional on being at the institution at any point in time. Conditional on who's there, who got there, and who hasn't left yet, right? So, but conditional on that, this is the relationships that we see. So no evidence that this actually is good for performance either. Right, so the question is, why does it actually persist? If this is bad for performance, if it makes people miserable and unhappy at work and they feel they don't belong and they want to leave, why does it actually persist? And here's where Kaisa, who's a sociologist, and we have had long discussions because economists and sociologists see these kind of like underlying undercurrents of why things survive in reality slightly different. So it's been super enlightening as a discussion. Something we can speak to with data is, what do people believe this does to their research, right? So we asked in the survey, how well do you think you do in research relative to your peer group? And we did the same regression again. And if anything, all these are not significant, but if anything, people feel that they do better when they're exposed to this high MCC environment than they actually do. So that's the research. So far what I've shown you is these dominant norms of high competition are detrimental to well-being, also for men, not just for women. They do not seem to have positive performance effects, but employees underestimate the extent to which the effects are negative on performance. We think we're doing great, whereas we maybe are not doing as well as we're doing, we think. No, so the next one, and I'll be quick because I don't have a lot of time, is how can we actually create more inclusive environment? What can we do towards that? And as I've been doing this work, I was trying to collaborate with Santos Novartis, and in conversation with the Inclusion, DI department, and the Ethical Behaviors department, we got together and actually tried to create an intervention to increase psychological safety because they were interested in this. I'm sure you all know psychological safety is the sense that you have that it's safe in your team or in your group to take interpersonal risk, that you're not going to be criticized or looked down upon because you voice your ideas, that you can be different and feel perfectly included. So many organizations are interested in increasing psychological safety. We have few kind of tools that have proven to work, and that's what triggered this. So what we did is they shared their data, they've been measuring psychological safety, and we designed an experiment. We have a control group and then 2 treatment groups, which was what we did is send an email, and I'll show you maybe directly the email. We sent an email to managers in around 600 teams, so 7,000 individuals, encouraging them to hold more frequent one-to-one meetings. And in addition to the body of the email, and both treatment groups receive the same body of the email. You need to have more frequent conversations, make sure you connect with your employees in your one-to-one meetings. We attach 2 different PDFs. So the PDFs are actually these ones, where in one of the PDFs, we focus, which we call the needs intervention. We told them, focus, use your one-to-one time to discover and adapt to the individual needs of your team. And we sort of, invite them to be empathetic, ask questions, ask them to come up with the questions they want to work on that are important to the individual themselves. The other one is one that, so it's more like a needs, psychological needs and opening up this psychological connection. The second one is more about focus on the barriers that you face at work, the blockers, and how you can be more effective and remove them. So those are the 2 interventions. And then we go in and say, what's the impact of these 2 treatments relative to a control group? Do they actually manage to increase psychological safety? So this is the effect that we find. So we measure psychological safety at the team level and at the organizational level that, with the measures that they actually were using. And we find that this needs treatment had a very, it's funny, Anyway, the needs treatment had a significant positive effect. So this means that average reported psychological safety at the team level increased by 1.7 points. They're rated in a scale from 0 to 100. The mean is 82. It's about 15% of a standard deviation. So it's not huge, but it's a small nudge, right? We're just sending these PDFs to the managers and seeing if it evolves. On the task treatment, positive but no significant effect. But we found a very interesting heterogeneity in who responded. So now I'm breaking up the result into 3 groups. Those who had low levels of psychological safety to begin with, these were the really bad scoring teams. Those who had like so-so levels of psychological safety, and then those who were high. If you start with the high, these were already ranking over 90. So we did the intervention. If anything, it went down. It's basically 0. No effect on the high team. But very different effects in the low team. So for the really bad teams to start with, it was actually the needs treatment, really establishing this personal rapport with the leader that actually created this positive effect, 5-point increase. Whereas for the middle ones, it was the blockers that had more of an impact, right? And so we think about this creates kind of a strategy to how to improve psychological safety in these organizations is that you're really, you're a mess. You need to start establishing this personal rapport. Once that's built, you can start being a bit more sophisticated and talking about removing blockers and actually talking more directly about the work content. So we did a number of other things. For example, we looked at which teams were they, for which teams was this more effective. And it was exactly where the teams that were scoring badly. So we saw in the baseline that junior managers and teams with majority male team members had lower psychological safety, and we saw that this is where the effects were bigger. Of course, there's bigger room for improvement, but the good news of this is that this can be taught. You're not, as a leader, you're not sort of condemned to have a given psychological safety. This can be taught, people can improve, and we can do better. We looked at possible mechanisms because several things, these are very bundled treatment, right? But different things could lead to the result, and we found that several mechanisms seem to be driving this. One is that the number of one-to-one meetings increased, so some of this comes from the fact that we managed to increase the time with the manager. We also measured changes in the content of the conversations, and we observed changes in the content of the conversations relative to the control group, so they were talking about different things, so it seems to be, the experiments seem to be doing what we designed it to do. And we also see that it improved the relationship and perception of the manager. And the last thing I didn't put here, but we also see that the teams that increase, as psychological safety increases, teams are more likely to report that they're willing to take risks, that they're willing to experiment, that and their teams seem to be, this is not significant, but seem to be being more stable, that people are less likely to leave. So that's it. So I showed you first very quickly how these norms of dominance and hyper-competitions are also bad for performance, or at least they don't seem to be clearly making us publish more in this academic setting. They're detrimental to employees, so it's hard to argue that the price to pay for higher performance. And the good news from the second one is that we can actually improve these norms. The norms matter, that's the first one, and we can actually improve these norms. And it provides a bit of a strategy to how to start changing norms within organizations, recognizing that norms build locally. You build norms with other people slowly, and that's the psychological safety change. And that change is possible so that leaders can learn to do better. That's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.